Dr. Walter, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you,
Oh,
Mel?
wonderful. Okay, good. We had a slight technical moment, but I just introduced you, and I kind of wanted you to follow up a little bit. Um, one of the things, Walter, that um, I've been told is that you have an interesting story about your mother and what she told you when you were going to be a school superintendent.
Yes, yes. Uh,
Why,
can you hear,
why don't you
can you
share
hear me?
that?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you fine. Why don't you share that
Okay.
story about your mom when you were going to become the superintendent of schools?
Mel, say that question one more time. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I heard a story that you once told about your mother. Um, I think it was, yeah, when your mother told you something when you were serving as superintendent of Springfield, Illinois, and
Yes.
it's kind of an interesting story, and I just wanted you to to recapture it for everybody.
Well, my mother, she had a 1,000, batting average when it relates to predictions, visions, and those kinds of things. And whenever she told me something, I knew that the probability of it coming to fruition was very high. So one day, my mom and I would talk sometimes two, three times a day in between meetings and everything. And I remember talking to her on the phone, and she said that, you're being called for another assignment, a greater work. And I always would talk to my mother about me being independent, me having my own company, me kind of doing my own thing. And she said, it's about that time, but I wasn't ready yet in my mind. And my mom said that I may be dead and gone, but you're going to listen to me. You're going to see what I'm talking about. And my mom was very beautiful. She was healthy. And she had a sedative that had an adverse effect on her. And she ended up dying unexpectedly that same week, later that week. And it just kind of rocked my world. And so after about 8 years in Springfield, Illinois, I decided to resign, to start my company from the Heart International Educational Services. But I just kept getting a thought, a dream, a premonition that this wasn't it. It was more. And then I embarked upon remembering the experience that I had when I was in fourth grade around Black history and how traumatic it was, and how my mom told me that one day I'm going to be able to tell that story, to the
Oh,
world. And so, as a result of that, woke up in the middle of the night and just started writing and writing and writing and researching and calling upon people to kind of get their thoughts. And about a year and a half into the work, I had contacted Joel, who I've known for years, and say, "Hey, man, would you join me on this?" And so, believe it or not, my mother had planted the seed many years ago, and she saw something at that time that I couldn't see. But as we went further into the process, the vision became real. And now it's a reality that we have the potential to impact millions of lives across this country in a
definitely.
meaningful way. And that's where we are right now.
Yeah, I have another question before I bring on Joel. I have a question. You were a social studies teacher. Did this vision, when you were studying, when you were teaching and studying, did this vision ever come to you, or ever think that maybe I really know somebody needs to address this problem?
Multiple times. And one of the things that I was blessed with was having a principal at the time when I was teaching in a New York school district called Brighton Central Schools. And I remember my first day there when I went to meet the principal and getting prepared for the school year. It's one of the top districts in the nation. And one of the things that he said to me was he took a textbook and he dropped the textbook out of the window. So I thought it was part of the initiation process. So I began to go and get the textbook to retrieve it. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to get the book." I thought maybe this was the initiation process. And unfortunately, he says, "No, I don't want you to rely on the textbook. I want you to bring experiences in the classroom the kids never heard of before. He said, not only do you talk about W.B. Du Bois and the Talented 10, let's talk about how he and Booker T. Washington were antithetical to each other. And you have to bring students a whole nother perspective of history, history that your ancestors interwoven into world history and also American history. And so that was my first green light to say that, you know, something is wrong here and we need to tell the whole story. And so that was part of this messaging that I received to bring this work to fruition as well. Thank you. Great question.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, I have a manuscript, a book that's going to be published later on this year or early 2024. It's on ex-slaves who became millionaires and were the first civil rights workers. And there's so much about Black history, even today, after 40, 50 years, when it became, you know, a separate division. You had a Black Studies department in a lot of universities. There's still so much of the history that is unknown even today. And the book that you and Joel have created just adds so much to this dialogue. Because when I read the book, and I think this is what I find remarkable, it's really an anthropological study as much as a historical study. It's an archaeological study as much as it is a social study. And when you say it's all inclusive, in terms of technique, the book is all inclusive. It includes every discipline. It's a very interdisciplinary approach. It doesn't just rely on diaries or or traditional sources. So I think this took years to germinate in your mind. I know it did, and it did with Joel too. So without further ado, I want to bring on Joel. Okay, so let me bring Joel onto the screen and let's talk. Joel, hello.
How you doing, Mel? Hi, Walter.
How's it going, sir?
Now, I know quite a bit about you, Joel. We've had quite a bit of communication, but I just want to let everybody know a little bit more. You're from Alberta, Canada, correct?
That's true.
And you served for 20 seasons as one of the mentor chaplains in the history of the NBA, the Washington Bullets Wizards, from 78 to 98. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And you survived 6 coaching changes and 3 general manager changes.
That's true. That's probably the biggest miracle.
You lasted longer than most of the players. You also you have something that I find fascinating called the Freeman Institute and Black History Collection, and it's made up of over 3,000 genuine documents and artifacts. And the oldest piece you have dates back to 1553.
It's true.
Right? Yeah. Okay. And the collection has been shown in the United Nations. It's been back-to-back exhibits on the transatlantic slave trade for 3 months in 2011 and 3 months in 2012, with well over 1 million visitors. I mean, your collection has been everywhere. You also conducted exhibitions at the White House Communication Agency and the Clinton Presidential Library, which I want you to do again. And also the Secret Service, the NIH, and many others. So you've had a long history of collecting and being involved with Black history. Okay, how and why? Why don't you tell everybody?
Well, it's to me, it all started working with the players in the NBA, and a lot of the players, of African descent, and they're looking at me like, this white guy from Canada looks 15. I don't know, who is this guy? And so there are a lot of layers of suspicion there. And so little by little, we became friends. The trust level, they were looking at me as, is he trustworthy? And so little by little, friendships began to emerge. And along with the friendships came more curiosity, questions.
So you had the Larry Bird experience.
Yes, I guess so. Not sure what that was, but whatever it was, I probably did.
Well, Larry Bird, was the white player for the Boston
Okay, yeah,
Celtics,
yes.
and all the black players said that guy is black. He is not white.
Well, I don't know. And anyway, it just became a situation where little by little they began to ask questions that forced me to start studying. And that's really how my interest began to emerge during that time period.
So what were the steps to creating the Freeman Institute? You started collecting artifacts, or how did they
Well,
emerge?
I was never in school. I was in high school, especially. I was never a very good student, and I always tried to skate by. And I was interested more in having fun, playing practical jokes, and being the class clown or whatever it was. That was my that's just what I was all about. And so it wasn't until I started researching, and then I'd be reading about Frederick Douglass, and I'd say, "Man, I wonder if there's a letter out there, that he actually wrote and hand wrote and signed." And then I'd embark upon a mission to find a letter. And then if it was Madam C.J. Walker, Annie Malone, whoever I was studying, Harriet Tubman, I had to find something that was a touchstone to that particular person and would help tell the story. And that's really how more of a tactile approach. And of course, when you're collecting, it's just one of those things that you have to know you have to know what you're looking for. Because, for instance, Pearl Bailey had played in the movie Porgy and Bess, and so one of the dealers had a check from her, and it was and he didn't know that this check was her actual payment for the movie, her part in the movie Porgy and Bess, and she was not the marquee player in that movie. And so when I looked at it, I immediately knew because of the research I'd done around that, and so that's been a different way maybe to learn about history, but it has been a very helpful way for me. And I find that when you get in front of a group of middle school kids or high school kids and you hold up a piece of history and then tell the story around that person, it has a mesmerizing effect upon the audience.
Yeah, it definitely does. It really is. The artifacts are a real connection, especially
Mhm.
especially today when so many students are so visual learners because of the internet and cell phones. Everything is so visual. So when you present an artifact, I'm sure it really brings everything home to them. One of the things I want to ask you, Joel, is about a person named Ivan van Sertima. And I'm sure that rings a bell with you. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Why don't
Yeah,
you tell
Ivan.
everybody?
Yeah,
Ivan,
Ivan
okay.
is actually he was responsible for about 30 volumes of literature. His most famous was They Came Before Columbus, and also Egypt Revisited is another very important work that he put together. And then he has a lot of work around the Moors, Black presence in Asia, the Olmec people, and so on. And so I had heard about him, and someone who knew him gave me his phone number. Of course, this is all pre-digital, so there's no cell phones. So I called him, and his wife Jacqueline answered the phone, and I could hear a stage whisper, "This guy wants to talk to you," or something. And so Ivan came on. He was a professor at Rutgers University, and we talked, and I opened up with Ivan. You don't know me. I barely know you, but I'd like to get to know you, and I'd like to think that you'd like to get to know me. That was my opening statement. And then we just started talking about all kinds of different things. And then 45 minutes later, he asked me for my address, my physical address. And I didn't think anything of it. I gave it to him. And about 3 weeks later, this big box of books arrived as a gift from Ivan to me. And the book that really grabbed me was Egypt Revisited. It was like driving down the Autobahn of life at 90 miles per hour and wrapping my brain around a telephone pole. I mean, I was just completely mesmerized by the images. And of course, when I read a book, I talk back to the author. What do you mean by this? And now I understand that. Oh, I write to the author. So I called him back up and I said, I have people in my life that are, I would say, cultural guides, but would you become my prime historical guide? And he just said, yes, I'll do that. And we spent hours upon hours discussing whatever was ricocheting around my little pea brain. All I can say is his middle name must be Patience, because he was very, very patient with me and all the crazy questions I had to ask.
Was this before you met Walter? Or not before you started working on the book with Walter?
Yeah, this was back in the early 90s.
Okay.
Walter and I connected about 25 years ago, I guess, now.
Okay. Well, I'm curious, Joel, since you had this this interesting guide to history. Why don't you tell everybody, because we really, I in the introduction I mentioned that it all begins in Africa, and that so many people they think Africa is a country. They, they, they don't even realize that it's a series of countries and it has multiple cultures. So why don't you tell everybody what you know about hunting, gathering, fishing, agriculture, and industry in early African history?
Well, what we found interesting as Walter and I were researching this. You have the North, South, East, West, Central Africa. There's basically 5 regions in the continent of Africa. And of course, when you look at it through the African lens, there's African kingdoms that transcend the current geopolitical lines. And so it's not as we might refer to the countries today, but they were dealing with kingdoms back then. And of course, the different climates, the sub-Saharan climate would allow for certain things to be grown from an agricultural standpoint. And then when you get into the mountainous regions of Mount Kilimanjaro and Kenya region, other things would be grown. So it's corn, millet, cotton, and all kinds of different barleys, wheats, and different agriculture crops would be grown in different regions. And then you have the different farming aspects, for goats and sheep. And then the hunting would be, the oldest documented arrow point is in South Africa, a petroglyph on the side of a cave, the painting of an arrowhead. And so we have some very ancient things happening in Africa that, if we look at the Pangea view, that you see the 2 puzzle pieces of South America connecting with Africa and so on and so forth. And something happened that caused the continents to divide with the water in between. I don't know what to think about all that. And there's people much smarter than me that have probably more elegant opinions about that. But the impact of Africa on so many things, we can even see here when people were kidnapped and enslaved and brought here. We know that the cooking dishes, the hunting, the gathering, the fishing, all of that came with them when they came across during the mid-Atlantic, the slave trade. And so, then you have the hunting. They would have these things that they called hopos, just with wide swaths of agriculture, of real estate, and these guiding animals. They would have animal drives into these hopos, and then they'd have warriors waiting. And you could even use natural, let's say a canyon type of situation, and drive them into a canyon, and then have a stop. And that's where the hunters would kill what was needed. And they never kill more than what that was needed at that time because of preservation for future hunts. Then the fishing weirs. In the Stanley Falls that they called the Stanley Falls, they would set up certain things. In fact, I don't know if I can even find it here, but I have an image of that. We have an image of that in the textbook. Yeah, here it is.
And so everybody should go to blackhistory365.org, and you can see a lot of this. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's at bh365.org. It's B is in black, H is in history, bh365.org. But I don't know if people can see this, but here's buckets set up and an elaborate setup, and they were catching like probably 9, 10 fish an hour or so. And I think at the end of this day, they had something like 90 to 100 fish they had caught just by putting them. And then you have people going after the elephants, and the hippopotamus is probably the most dangerous animal in Africa to hunt. But they had ways of doing that would mitigate the danger.
Yeah, you mentioned Pangea, and the plate tectonics caused massive shifts and splitting up the continents, and then you had continental drift creating the Atlantic Ocean, and it's fascinating because there's a cultural connection between the Americas and Africa that was just fragmented because of the change in how the continents became organized. So much of what happened in Africa became totally separate from the Americas when people started to populate, countries, when hominoids began to walk upright, and it started all in Africa. And when we talk about our ancestors, that's where we have to go look. The two places have been Africa and China, and they were on either side of the continental drift. So, I think you're raising an interesting perspective talking about the different kinds of climates and how that impacted agriculture, hunting, and ultimately, it really impacts culture too. So, I think that's interesting. And these are the kinds of things that people can learn from going through your textbook, things that, generally are left out of most texts on African Americans, and it's included in yours. So I think it's wonderful. I think the kind of work, the connection between the Freeman Institute, the text, Black History 365, and Walter is really remarkable that it all came together like that. The chance is 1 in a million, that the pieces would fall into place.
Well, I'll just say here that Walter was the trailblazer. He was the man that had the vision. And when he called me, I just simply said, later, you had me at hello. And so he's the founder, the one that really set the tone for the direction of the entire project. And I'm very grateful for that.
Well, Walter, let me ask you a question. Following up on Joel talking about agriculture and fishing, you have some interesting things that you've explored, like the Kingdom of Axum. Why don't you tell everybody about what that is?
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'm dealing with my dog here, trying to keep him quiet. Could you repeat that question, Mel?
Yes, my question is about the ancient Kingdom of Axum, something that you have knowledge about, and I think it's relative to what Joel was just talking about. So why don't you share that?
Yeah, I do want to just add, when we talk about civilization and the movers and shakers of civilization in the world, it definitely goes back to what we affectionately call the Kubulan, which is known as Africa at this time. But Ethiopia is one of those areas, and when we talk about the Axumites and the contributions there, on a personal level, my wife's from Ethiopia, and her ancestry is there, and she has it really rooted in her blood. And she oftentimes reminds me that she doesn't operate so much with a colonized mind. So, many Ethiopians kind of share that, and they marvel and bask in that. And one of the names of one of my sons, his name is Izana, and he's named after King Azana, and who was really responsible for this whole notion of currency in terms of coins and monetary evidence and transactional things, and also the whole belief religious system. And then his middle name is Haben, which means recognized for something noble. And then my other kid is Omari, means the highest son. So we have relics of Axum and Ethiopia right in our household. So
That's wonderful. That's a great story. If
yeah.
you don't mind, what I'd like to do is turn to the textbook a little bit. And one of the things that I find most intriguing in the text, and I think it's rather proprietary, is the elephant experience. And I kind of I kind of thought this would be something interesting to show everybody. Um, so, who wants to talk about it? Who wants to go first, talking about the elephant experience?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I know that when we were developing the rudiments of the textbook and the curriculum, we knew that this would be a very tough topic, or there will be some tough topics that was not going to be easily digestible by a lot of people, and it could create conflict and those things. So we really wanted to have the reader have a sense of awareness to avoid, hot arguments, heated discussion. And so the elephant experience is an indication that these may be hot topics that are forthcoming, and to prepare the reader to understand it. And as they say, as Joel says, that the elephant has the largest hippocampus of all the animals, and the memory of the elephant, but you can only chew it one bite at a time. So it gives us the opportunity to stay true to our mission, critical and analytical thinking and thought, and the ability to reason and to have an effective dialogue that can take place in a meaningful way that could bring about a great deal of healing opposed to more division. And Joel, pass the mic over to you.
The whole idea, I think, to hitchhike off what Walter has communicated so elegantly, is that we have different topics, and I guess the Uncle Tom, 3/5 of a human being. There's the topic of scientific racism. Should we tear the statues down? Reparations, manifest destiny. Black people in the deadly dance with both American political party machines. Can a white person ever fully understand the Black experience in America? The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. All these different topics that we can discuss. And we have identified, and in the textbook, I think it's 52 of them in all. And it's kind of like this hand here. This thumb represents uncomfortable topics. And we had to develop, Walter and I wrestled with it, struggled trying to figure out how to do this in a way that's more healing and less divisive. And so the other four fingers connect with uncomfortability, but there has to be that schema and process to do it. Otherwise, chaos will emerge. And so the first finger hitchhikes off of our mission statement is we're inviting people to become critical thinkers. Then the next to become compassionate listeners. Next, to become fact-based, respectful communicators, and next, finally, to become action-oriented solutionists. And so, by putting all that together into a process, what happened is that we came up with this. The elephant. It's like everybody gets the metaphor. Hey, there's an elephant in the room, and as Walter said, the largest hippocampus, but also the EQ of an elephant rivals that of chimpanzees and some species of dolphins. So it has to be memorable and sticky, and something that will continue to be something later on in life. Students will say, as they reflect back on their education experience, they say, "Man, that elephant experience really challenged me." And then we have the talking stick that students will create. So even the first two classes are not even about Black history. The students in the first two classes will be understanding and developing how they're going to do the what. And then when they get into the what they're discussing, they'll have a process that they've created themselves. If the three of us created that process for every classroom, it would create rebellion. I don't agree with that word. I don't agree with that concept. But when they create it themselves, because everybody has a sign on their back says, "Please love me, please accept me, please don't judge me." And so when they go through that process themselves, then it's something that is very powerful. and it becomes something that the classroom then now can be truly a student-centered experience, which is the essence of great education.
Yeah, and I really think that from my experience, people feel better once it's brought to the light, once it's in space to have critical dialogue. Because sometimes people are thinking things, and I'm like, man, I really want to say it, but I'm afraid. But once the conversation ensues, it really sparks a lot of learning. It has that potential. And I think that it has, like Joe said, that it has a potential to bring about a lot of healing.
Yep.
It's a love letter to the world. And I think that elephant experience is one of the ways in which that we could create that dialogue to really get the world in this amazing conversation. And one of the things that we're doing too, we're finalizing a Latin textbook as well as a Caribbean textbook, and so that question and those books are similar to the elephant experience, but it's entitled "Truth Be Told," and I think that it gives us an opportunity to bring about a lot of misinformation that has been throughout the diaspora in terms of the impact of those people that were indigenous to the land, indigenous to the world, and the impact people of color have made on the globe. And so I think that our goal is to really begin to connect the dots. And at some point, we're going to look at Europe and the impact that Blacks have had in the system of Europe as well.
That's terrific. Yeah, that really needs to be done also. There's another show on Source Radio. It's by Dion Parsons, who's a very well-known jazz artist and he's a Grammy winner. And he's from the West Indies, and he's creating a new form of jazz called Jazz Ribian, and it's incorporating all the Afrocentric beats and rhythms that have been part of the West Indies experience because of the diaspora. And he's in a sense, he's really creating another genre of jazz because it's definitely related to the time when Africans were brought to the West Indies, and they brought with them instruments. They brought with them different kinds of rhythms, and so the diaspora that you're talking about is very important, and its impact on Europe really has gone relatively unrecognized. So I think that's something that's really essential, Walter. I think that would be a wonderful work to really pursue. I have a question for both of you. I don't know if it's something you can answer readily. Can you give us one elephant experience topic how you created these and how it actually works?
Before we do that, Joe, can you take a moment and just share the experience that we had in Oregon, if you don't mind?
Yes.
Because
Yeah,
I think that would be a good
great.
segue
Yeah.
to get into that question.
Yeah, that's thank you. We were in Bend, Oregon, and we had Walter, I think about 25, maybe 30, maybe 25, 30 over the entire day. But we had two people running for governor. We had soccer moms. We had clergy, educators. There were also people that were on boards of education for that region. And we know all the challenges that happen many times in those meetings, and a lot of chaos and a lot of questions, a lot of anger expressed, sometimes both ways. And so what happened is that we introduced the elephant experience, and I think the one we used the one, should we tear the statues down? And to answer your question, Mel, is that the elephant experience around should we tear the statues down? We have about 5 QR codes that are for tearing the statues down. We have 5 QR codes that are against tearing the statues down. And then we have 3 QR codes that show the hybrid approach. Let's leave the statues up and maybe put another statue next to it, like Dred Scott. let's put let's if we have Justice Taney statue, let's put Dred Scott statue next to it, and that can help hopefully sponsor tens of thousands, maybe more, educational conversations that can emerge. So anyway, we introduced that topic. They created their own set of rules of engagement, code of conduct, whatever you want to call it, around the table. And then they had a talking stick. The juniper tree is a big deal in the Bend, Oregon area. So they had a local artisan create talking sticks, one for each table. They had round tables. And then they went into the process. Well, Mel, what happened is that people didn't want to leave. After we had 3 hours for that room, and people didn't want to leave. And we found out the next day that evening there was a school board meeting, which in previous months and even few years had been very tense and charged experiences. Well, they said that evening that it was most civil, kind, 2 ears, 1 mouth, listening type of experience that they had ever experienced in recent memory. And they said the threads go back to the elephant experience that they went through that morning with BH365, with Walter and myself and our team that was there. And so that's just kind of a microcosm. It's like lightning in a bottle that could actually work in communities around the country through the vehicle of BH365 and this proprietary process that we affectionately call the elephant experience.
Yeah, and one of the things too that's remarkable to me is that it's amazing how the conversation starts out with the non-political correctness, and then it comes to the middle where everyone has voice. There's a lot of listening and reasoning. And so it gives us an opportunity to go through the process of dealing with tough topics and not candy coating anything. And I think sometimes with the initial view of chaos, learning takes place. And I learned that when I was a classroom teacher. I remember I was getting observed, and I had a multiplicity of activities going on in my classroom simultaneously, but kids were learning. They were learning in what appeared to be chaotic. And the principal came in and he said, lesson well designed, because oftentimes people think that learning takes place when you have a docile audience and people are just listening in a lecture style. But I think that the elephant experience really allows people to have context, number one, but to go through the process of deconstruction, reconstruction, and construction, where they have an opportunity to tear what their implicit biases were in some cases, to analyze them, and then put truth to power and really change some of their thinking in certain ways. And so that's the experience that we're getting from some of the data that we're getting back from school districts, as well as doing away with many misconceptions and stereotypes.
Walter, this is such an important exercise, particularly in today's world. And obviously, the application goes far beyond just Black History 365. The elephant experience is something that is, really, really essential. If we look at what's taken place, in Congress, where if you actually engage in a dialogue with the opposition party, you're pushed out of office. I mean, we become so intolerant in so many ways as a nation, and because there's no dialogue. I mean, you can't even engage. So, and we hear this, in so many different ways. When people are being silenced, and they're not allowed to speak or go on campus. And this friend is so antithetical to my experience growing up in this country, and just the exact opposite, that dialogue was opening, not shutting down. So I think what Joel's pointing out in Oregon, and what you pointed out, Walter, in terms of process, there is an application, and I think Joel mentioned, in the community, far beyond Black History 365. It's a great platform. So one last question about this. how did you choose when you have all the QR codes? How did you choose those particular QR codes? How did you go through and sort through any of these major um, um, competitive debates? How did you organize from all the
Well,
myriads of data?
yeah, that was a long, long process. And, Joe can also embark upon it that we spent many hours dissecting QR codes. In some cases, we have QR codes that really fit what we were looking for contextually, and it really aligned with all the rubrics that we measured each QR code on. And then the last sentence, someone used foul language. It's like, man, we got to start all over again. So we went through that, and then we had cases like, man, how can we bleep this out or something? So we wanted to have QR codes that were specifically aligned with the information that we had researched. And the strategy behind it was to have a very technologically inclined textbook and not have the historical boring text, if you will. We wanted our book to be alive and well and to capture the reader and the learner and get them engaged into learning.
That's terrific.
Yeah, the book is 1,248 pages, and believe us, it would have been. It's an encyclopedia because you can imagine how many pages would be required to fill the information that comes from the QR code. The QR codes allow us to have a voluminous amount of information in one volume. And it takes people off on different tangents, and they come back to the textbook. And as Walter was saying, we'd be listening to a video, let's say, and let's say it's a 12-minute video, and it's like, oh, this is a great video, and then they drop the F-bomb, at 2 minutes and 37 seconds, and it's like, oh no, now we've got to, like Walter said, could we re-edit this video because it's such great content? But then you have to start from scratch and go find another video
Yeah.
and keep doing that. And we had to listen to every single second of every video in order to include it. And that is, you can imagine, there's films in there, there's websites, there's videos, all kinds of different bits of
Articles.
information.
Yeah. A lot of
That's great.
articles in there too.
Yeah.
And Joel is right. It caused us to be very meticulous in our work. And we had a high degree of excellence that we had to follow. And I think that, going through these processes that we had in place allowed us to put out a product that, we have not had any open arguments about because we did our homework on everything, every aspect of the book, in all of our books, because we have kindergarten all the way past the large textbook that we're talking about today. So it just really forces us to be really tight and crystal clear with our information.
And also, I want to mention this, that we're working on a book called The Elephant Experience. It's just basically, it's going to be filled with QR codes, but also since we have 52 in the textbook, we're going to have about 75, and we're going to get into topics that were too hot for the textbook, if you can imagine that. And this is going to be more for the college and corporate level, brown bag lunch, maybe two guys, a white guy and a black guy, want to get together for a whole year every Tuesday for lunch. And they read the information, they study, research, and they come back together. And then the pencil or a fork or a knife becomes their talking stick initially, and then they can really have something of substance to work through, but it's built around QR codes and those types of things.
Well, I wanted to spend a lot of time on the elephant experience because I think everybody needs to really understand how central this is to our culture today. It's so vitally important. I want to go back to Africa for a minute and spend a little time there because that's really where the book opens. And I wanted to ask Walter, about what's the importance of the Mansa Musa culture and the ancient Mali Empire. You want to tell everybody a little bit about that?
Yeah, I do. I think that when we look at, like I do a comparative analysis with Mansa Musa, and when we talk about wealth and the attaining of wealth, and I think that that's something that I even tell my own biological children, let alone children that I have an opportunity to interface with, who Mansa Musa was, the richest person ever. And people are amazed by that. People are really shocked by that. People are really shocked about, the kingdoms before they became these geopolitical terms that we are accustomed to today. And the ingenuity and the creativity, the intellectual astuteness that was exemplified. And so when we talk about, three categories of Mansa Musa's work, he made sure, besides inheritance, he made sure that he would have products that were very meaningful to civilization at that time. And then, services, he was a man of faith, but he had services that he was aligned to, and then owning, all this land and real estate. And those are three things that really attribute to gaining wealth today: a product to sell, a service to provide, and acquiring as much real estate as you possibly can. And what it does, it opens up the light for many young people to know that they don't have to be athletes, they don't have to be entertainers, that they can acquire this wealth by following some of the principles that Mansa Musa had left even to this day. And I always say you can go from poverty to riches by studying Mansa Musa.
I have a question about that, Walter.
Mhm.
The definition of acquiring property or private property, was private property treated as a term used the same way we use it today?
That's a great question. It really is, because when I was younger, I remember visiting some relatives, and this has always stayed with me. I think I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I was down in New York City, and one of my relatives says, "Well, our landlord is coming by." And I said, "Who in the hell is the Lord of the land? I mean, who's this land? What what does that term mean?" And so I started to deconstruct that term. And then I remember growing up and watching a movie that I Would Cry No More Forever. And it was about the Indians and land acquisition and how it was acquired and all of those things. So I've always questioned that, because there was a belief that land was for everyone, but all of a sudden, who died and said that you own this land, that I have to buy it from you, or that you are the Lord of the land, that kind of thing. So, but that's a great question that you asked. So I'm still trying to figure that one out to this
Yeah,
day.
in Native Americans, when European settlers came over and started putting fences around their land, the Native Americans laughed at them and said, "Why would you want to keep yourself in?" They never thought of it. They were trying to keep people out.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
their notion of private property was radically different than what Europeans brought over here.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Definitely.
yeah, let's turn to something else. Let's talk about another aspect of this inclusive history. Music is so important within culture. I mean, we know that in every situation. Um, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Black History 365, the BH 365 music that accompanies the text?
Yeah, I can start it off. So Joel and I went to, we had this vision that we just wanted this to be different. We wanted to be very authentic, very organic in terms of putting out a product, something that the world has never seen before. And we know how important music is to all people, particularly young people. And young people of all hues, all ethnicities. You can go to China. I mean, you can go anywhere in the world. Japan, they probably can't speak English well, but they understand hip hop. They just love it. I mean, massive concerts, everything. So we contacted one of the best producers of his day in terms of this world, um, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Kevin K.O. Cates. And Joel had known him through Benjamin Carson. I got a chance to know him through Joel, as well as Armstrong Williams and those type of folks. So Kale's a very interesting guy. So Dr. Cates, we went down, we spent a day with him down in Atlanta, Georgia, and he did what artists usually do. You know, we said, man, is he getting it? Is he attentive? But he was absorbing everything. And then he wanted to take it back to the lab. He wanted to research it. He read every word in the textbook, and he created music that aligns itself with every chapter and every unit in the textbook. And it is simply amazing. I mean, I always say that the music itself is a learning experience. It really is, because it tells the story of Black History 365, an inclusive account of American history. So we wanted to marry, those two components to this work.
Walter, what's really exciting to me about this, people have different learning styles. Some people, read, some people listen. So, and for a lot of kids, they can get the story from listening to the music just as readily as they can reading the text. So they can get the message. That's really the point. And that's what I keep going back to. The inclusiveness is just not the narrative in the text, but it's also in terms of the multiple cultural elements that are part of this project, like creating music that fits the chapters and gives people, everyone a different perspective on how to understand the material. So that's what makes it so inclusive to me, and it's just wonderful.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Mel, you're really on point, because many of the late nights that we were up working, we were thinking about the major three modalities of learning. The visual construct, the auditory construct, and the kinesthetic construct. And so we made sure that we even have a lot of hands-on activities, built into the book for that type of learning. And so we put a lot of it in our teacher resource guide so that they can create lesson designs that's going to attract and hit all the sensors of every learner in that classroom.
That's wonderful. I want to keep staying with the topic of Africa which is the topic for today, and I wanted to ask Joel about something that I had a tremendous experience with when I was probably in my 20s, the Rosetta Stone. I had gone to the British Museum to see the Magna Carta and to see the Rosetta Stone, and the Rosetta Stone captivated me. I looked at that, and it's a black obelisk, and it features multiple languages that allowed people to the first time to understand hieroglyphics. And I know, Joel, you have a decided interest in the Rosetta Stone. Why don't you share that with everybody?
Well, we included it in the textbook because it is the key that unlocked the secrets of ancient Egypt. 2 languages on the Rosetta Stone, 3 inscriptions, the hieroglyphics, only 14 lines of it. The demotic script, we get the word democracy. It comes from the Greek word demos, and then Greek. And so it was found, unearthed, I should say, uncovered in around 1799 on the west bank of the Nile by some French soldiers during the Napoleonic Egyptian military campaign. And the reason why we include it in the textbook is because that's the key. When they went through the whole process, took 23 years to crack the code to hieroglyphics, and then that sponsored the soft science of archaeology, biblical archaeology, and all these different things that we enjoy. It slowed the process down and caused people to understand more about the mores and folkways of ancient Egyptian culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's you and I have had conversations about this. It was the first major code breaking attempt, to really be able to decipher hieroglyphics, which people were clueless about until the Rosetta Stone. So it has a lot of modern applications as well. Would you agree?
Yes. It does.
Yeah, it really it does. It's really fascinating. You know, Joel, there's a free gift that is in Black History 365 that relates to ancient Africa. What is that free gift?
Well, the next slide that you put up will show a QR code, and all people have to do is to put their cell phone camera up to that, and then it'll take them to a document that'll provide them it's our gift. Walter and I, this is our gift to the viewers and listeners. Well, listeners can't see it, but we can arrange if they reach out to us through the website. This will give them the entire first unit about ancient Africa. It's our gift to everyone.
Wonderful. You know, this has been really so instructive because it really begins to situate the remainder of the series on Black History 365 by us really devoting a full hour to the first chapter on Black history as it originated in Africa. You know, so I think it was really just really intriguing for a lot of people to really start to understand. You really have to go back and find the origins if you want to really understand the culture and move forward. So, you know, this has been a wonderful demonstration. I so appreciate both of you, you know, and the show and the book and everything you're doing. I want to ask you, Joel or Walter. We've gone through an introductory show last week, and today we had our first foray into African culture, and we have so much more coming up. But I understand you're going to be taking a hiatus after this show for several weeks. So can one of you or both of you, yeah, why don't you address that a little bit? And so
yeah, we'll be back because of travel schedules. We'll be back here 6 weeks from now, approximately, and I think you'll be advertising a date, Mel, and we'll look forward to next show will be about the second unit, which has to do with the slave trade, enslavement, and kidnapping and slave rebellions.
Okay, terrific. Well, look, I think everybody's going to want to come back. You know, we have right now we have over almost 5,000 people who tuned in this morning to watch your show. So I'm glad to see that you're starting to build an audience, and we want to keep them so everybody listen to what Joel just explained. They'll be gone for about 6 weeks, and we'll be back.
And that topic for me, that's one of my pain points right there.
Yeah.
And it evokes a lot of stuff, if you will. And I think that it would allow me to be a representative of how so many people who look like me feel to this day.
Yeah. You know, Walter, I remember being in college and seeing a rendering, a drawing of the interior of a slave ship where people were lined up, their feet pointing towards the center of the ship, packed like sardines with no space between them. You know, and you know, I remember looking at that and just wondering how can someone do this? I mean, how can you do this to people? And you know, it started my journey on wanting to know more. You know, in high school, we got the imperialist view when I was growing up. You know, and when I got to college, I started seeing these things. I started to say, why wasn't I told? Why was this all left out? And that started my journey. So, you know, my PhD is in U.S. economic and business history, and it's also I have a PhD in neuropsychology. But it started my journey. I wanted to know about people and how people view each other, and it was, you know, it was traumatic for me, and it still is, and it still is.
Absolutely. Mel, where'd you go to undergrad?
Undergrad, I went to Adelphi University. I started at a Hofstra, finished at Adelphi. Graduate school, I went to the State University of New York at Stony Brook.
Okay.
And I got my PhD in neuropsychology and one in U.S. economic and business history.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you're a SUNY guy.
I'm a SUNY guy, yeah. And then
so am I.
Yeah, okay. Then I went back to teach at Adelphi University for 7 years. I taught in both psychology and in history and in political studies. I was interdepartmental.
Wow, that's awesome. That's
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great, Mel. That's awesome,
Well,
man. Very impressive
well, thank you. And I've been
background.
enjoying these. I've been enjoying these discussions with both of you immensely. I'm sure our audience has too. So, do you have any last words, Joel, that you want to leave, or Walter, with everybody?
I'll
I'll
just
let
say
Joel.
the website is bh365.org. That's B as in black, H as in history, 365.org. Black BH365.
And I echo those sentiments. BH365.org. Please visit our website. And
Yeah.
great show. It was great seeing both of you. And I have to jump because I got to get to my son's school. But thanks for
Okay.
everything, Mel. Joe,
Okay.
thank you.
Wonderful. My last words to everybody: when they're on hiatus, if you want to come to Source Radio and leave a message, feel free to come and just let us know, and we'll pass it along. So, everybody, have a great week, and thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.